Toddler Phonics Part 1. The Basic Foundation. Everyday Activities. In this video, you will learn how to introduce phonic sounds to your toddler, activities to do every day, how to make activity-based learning materials, how to give your toddler a sound foundation in phonics. Subconscious learning. Subconscious learning is a key element in the learning of the toddler, especially between the ages of 0 to 3 years. The toddler is learning intensely, even though it may not demonstrate learning. The toddler's mind is like a sponge. It absorbs and assimilates everything that is happening around. And it is very important to provide the right kind of input on a regular basis. Now, what are the key elements in subconscious learning? Introduce the input only once a day. Introduce the same input every day. And hand over ownership to the child as quickly as possible. What does handing over ownership mean? That means you allow the child to demonstrate learning. And one of the best ways to do this is to get the child to teach you what it knows. Now, in phonics, we look at two aspects of a letter. A letter has a name and certain sounds associated with it. For example, this letter has the name A. And one of the sounds associated with this letter is A. For example, and. Did you notice the A sound at the beginning of that word? Cat. Notice the A sound between K and T. Cat. A is one of the commonest sounds associated with A. Hence, the first sound the child associates with this letter is A. Now, we are going to begin with the first everyday activity that we do with a toddler. You will need an A4 sheet on which all the letters of the alphabet have been typed out, and at the bottom we have the vowels. Notice how we have the uppercase and the lowercase together. It is important that the toddler realizes and understands that both the uppercase and the lowercase have the same name and the same sound. A. Now, you will have to repeat the sound and the name every day to your toddler. Let your toddler keep the finger on every letter and repeat after you the name and the sound. A, B, B, C, K, D, D, E, F, G, G, H, H, I, E, J, J, K, K, L, L, M, N, N, O, O, P, P, Q, Q, R, R, S, S, T, T, U, A, V, V, W, W, X, X, Y, Y, Z, Z. When you are introducing the vowels, only use the sounds. A, E, I, O, A. If you do this every day, once a day, you'll be surprised that by the end of 1 month, your child will be able to identify a few letters and will be able to tell you the name and the sound. So, after 1 month, you could try random letter identification. Now, what is random letter identification? You could prepare flashcards, individual flashcards like this, and just take 3 letters a day. Once you have finished repeating the name and the sounds of all the letters from A to Z, and also the sounds of the vowels, get your child to identify the 3 letters that you'd have displayed. Get your child to say the name and the sound. S, S, M, M, A, E. Now, ask your child to identify this letter in the card. S, S, M, M, E, 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 E. Use 3 different letters every day. Within 3 or 4 months, your child will be able to identify all the letters of the alphabet, name the letter, and also say the sound. Do the same with the vowels. Prepare individual flashcards and then get your child to match the vowels. I, I, E, E, O, O, E, E, A, A. You could prepare a laminated sheet with all the vowels, and then you could get your child to take these cards and place them upon each vowel, and then to say the sound. These activities will get the learner to quickly master both the name of the letter as well as the phonic sounds within a few months. Toddler Phonics Part 2. Associating letter sounds with objects and finger tracing activities. In this video, you will learn how to introduce phonic sounds with objects, how to plan for basic finger tracing activities which will lay the foundations for written stroke practice and letter formation. When you are teaching your child to finger trace, always use the two-finger technique, the index finger and the middle finger. We use these two fingers along with the thumb to hold a writing tool. Hence, we begin finger tracing with these two fingers. First, the child is guided. An adult holds the child's hand and gets the child to trace following the given arrows. Then the child has to trace independently, saying the name of the letter and the sound. Prepare finger tracing cards as shown on this slide. Notice the arrows that show the proper direction that the fingers have to follow. It is a good idea to emboss these letters and give them a rough surface. It is easy to emboss. You could emboss it with millet, put Fevicol on the surface and pour millet or some other grain of your choice and let it dry. You could also use felt paper or handmade paper. Sandpaper is also used, but since it is a little rough, it could hurt the tender tips of a child's finger. So, prepare cards like this. Embossed would be preferable. If you are embossing, then these arrows would have to be marked on the outside of the letters. When the child is tracing, the child has to say both the name and the sound of the letter. A, 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 A. Now, we also have the cursive letter. This is not mandatory. Those who wish to introduce cursive letter tracing at this young age are free to do so. But if you would like to put this off for a later stage, that also could be done. But when tracing a cursive letter, the child should not lift the fingers but follow the numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, once again, the child says both the name and the sound of the letter. A, A. You could choose 1 or 2 letters per day maximum, not more than that. Now, behind each letter card, stick objects that begin with the sound of that letter and get your child to point to the letter, say the sound, and then name the object. A, alligator. A, ant. A, apple. A, ass. Do this with all the letter cards. Here you have an example of B. So behind this card, you would have pictures of objects that begin with B. B, book. B, bus. B, ball, etc. Another good activity is tracing on flour. You could use rice flour, wheat flour, or all-purpose flour. Rice flour is a good option because it does not stick to the fingers. Sand is not recommended because a little child tends to put his or her finger into the mouth often. Flour is harmless, and even if the child does this, it will cause no harm. Another good activity is to give your child an outline of the letter and then get the child to put clay dough on top of the letter. This builds again the memory of the shape in the mind of the child. So let's go back to the activities that are recommended. One is your letter tracing card, preferably embossed, and this helps to develop muscle memory. What is muscle memory? Muscle memory is the stimulation that goes from the tips of the fingers to the brain and forms a pattern in the brain. Hence, we recommend embossed letters. And behind each card, objects that begin with the name of the letter. Tracing on some kind of flour and then putting Play-Doh on the outlines of letters. All these activities are pre-writing activities. Toddler Phonics Part 3 Foundations in Letter Formation. In this video, you will learn how to teach toddlers the basics of letter formation, tools, techniques, and activities for writing practice. Pre-writing activities: pouring, using a dropper, stirring, sponging. All these will develop a child's fine motor skills, strengthen the fingers, and develop writing tool holding strength. Pouring activities. Take 2 containers with handles. You could use a cup or a small jug or a mug with a handle, but make sure it is something that doesn't break. Put grain into one of the containers and get your child to hold it and pour it into the other container. Then the child pours it back into the first container. Let the child do this repeatedly. It will strengthen the fingers and develop the child's gripping skills. The next activity is using a dropper. Now, while the previous activity strengthened the whole hand, this strengthens the fingers, especially the index, middle, and thumb finger, which are used in holding a writing implement. Give the child a small container with water. Colored water is attractive, and get the child to use a dropper and transfer the contents into another small bowl. Stirring is another good activity. Put some grain into a bowl and get your child to stir using a stirrer. Sponging, another very good activity where the child has to transfer liquid from one bowl to another using a sponge. Begin with a whiteboard marker. It is big and allows the child to grip it with ease. From the very beginning, focus on good pencil grip. Notice how the index finger, middle finger, and thumb are used to hold the marker. Then get the child to make shapes on a bowl of rice, wheat, or all-purpose flour. The bowl or tray should be fairly big so that you can spread out the flour properly. Here are proper finger grip, pencil grip for the left-handed child and the right-handed child. Begin correcting the finger grip from the very beginning, and always begin with a thick writing tool like a whiteboard marker. Another very good activity is to use an old newspaper and then get your child to make strokes on them. Fold the newspaper and then get your child to make strokes. You write the initial stroke and then your child has to imitate it. Then get your child to unfold and keep making strokes, writing strokes on different strips of the folded paper. This is an activity that children love. It is cheap and very, very useful. Scribbling on a whiteboard or on a newspaper or chart paper pasted on a wall is also a very good activity. The child should take a whiteboard marker and scribble and do whatever it wants. Again, this strengthens both the hand and the finger grip. Free scribbling and drawing on a blank sheet of paper, again with a whiteboard marker, is another very good pre-writing activity. Here are tracing boards. These are Montessori or preschool tracing boards made from wood. A little expensive. You could make them from cardboard and then give your child a jumbo crayon. Here the child has been given wooden tracing pencils. So put this on a white sheet of paper and get your child to trace. It's an activity that children love. Here is another tracing board for toddlers. Here you have the wooden pencil and the child has to trace these shapes. Then we move on to tracing on a sheet of paper. Notice how we get the child to trace with jumbo crayons, and these strokes have not been put in a frame. What do we mean by a frame? A frame would be a line drawn so that the child stays within those two lines. Initially, we don't give the child that line because we don't want to inhibit the child's stroke tracing. Now, once the child is comfortable tracing on these strokes, you could move to strokes that have been given within a frame. The frame is these two lines. So these two lines would actually force the child to keep the tracing within those two lines. Here is another good activity where the child traces the letter on wooden boards. Again, these are a little expensive, so it is your choice, not mandatory. Then we have letter formation, the uppercase, where the child follows the arrow marks. Notice how first the child traces the letter without a frame, and then we have a frame where these two lines now control the movement of the hand. Then we go to the lowercase, beginning first without a frame, getting the child only to trace the shapes that make up the letter and then going to the letter. So let's go back to the tracing. Notice how all these shapes, all these strokes are associated with the letters that we initially want to teach the child. A uppercase and A lowercase. So stick to strokes that are needed for the formation of particular letters. Then we get the child to write both the uppercase and the lowercase and juxtaposition both. It's a good idea to teach both together because from the very beginning the child has an understanding that both these letters have the same name and the same sound, and they are a pair. Please go to the website cft.in, go to the download section, click on others, and you will get very useful preschool guides and templates that you could use to teach your child. Below this video, you will find links to websites that have interesting preschool activities. Thank you.